Hello everybody, this is KrazyFlyinChicken. I'm here to do a Weekly War number 19 Musings video. This is going to be the first, which is largely unscripted. The point of it being that I used to do strategic maps and videos detailing what the events of all the previous Weekly Wars, but I've stopped doing that because I've taken a bit of a back role to the to PUG's logistics, especially for this game. So my footage is mostly me driving around in a truck, which is pretty useless. I did manage to secure some from Gresliebear, who filmed the whole thing. So I'll show you some of that. But before we get into that, I want to show you sort of an overview of what had happened during the war, so you can get a better understanding of it in case you missed it. So again, one of the disclaimers is this is a PUG perspective. I can't be everywhere at once, but I was driving around quite a bit, so I have some idea of where the fighting was happening. And also going by text and voice and communication channels, I can sort of piece together at least a rough image of how it was going down. If I'm not correct, I apologize, but please let me know because I'd love to hear it. A big part of this video is to prompt some discussion for the game. Okay, so PUG's original strategy, what we did was we spawned in the wild, and our goal for the first a while was to go here and secure Barony Road. We did manage to secure that. Our plan later was to go down to Lower Barony Field, secure it, and take the Blemish and secure it. And I know that looks like a really ambitious plan, but it makes some sense when you consider that our supply line for this part is super long. There was no way in hell we knew, during planning for this war, we knew there was no way that holding this supply line was going to last us long term. So the idea was if we managed to take a Lower Barony Field along with the Blemish, that we would just forget it even if we lost Barony Crossroad. It didn't matter because we could just run our supply line to the Blemish. But that was obviously too ambitious. So what we ended up with was this. We ended up securing Barony Road, and for the first 2 hours of the game we were taking a lot of pressure, a lot of fire from Greenfield Orchard, as well as soldiers coming from Lower Barony up from the Blemish. There were a lot of colonials rushing us there, and this is actually one of the very few games where PUG was just totally outmanned. It didn't seem to matter how much coordination or teamwork we were using, we were just totally outgunned. But before we get to that actual conflict, what had happened in the first hour, I'd say about the first hour, the Wardens had rushed from their spawn to attack Loftmire, and from our reports, definitely the Colonials were doing the same. So there was one heck of a fight that was going on here. Okay. So that was the first part of or the first hour or so of the game. And after the first hour, it looked something a bit like this. So you can see that all the nodes had changed hands, and the Wardens ended up with the advantage because the Wardens ended up with Loftmire. Now, it's clear from the comms that there was a fight that was going on in Loftmire for the first long while, but this town hall went up pretty early. I would say in the first 30 minutes. So if there was a fight, it was coming long way. The Colonials were coming from the Blemish, very likely, and we know for a fact because I had to drive down this Great Marsh Road a couple of times that they were definitely moving around and trying to get Loftmire with everything they could. In the end, Loftmire had some pretty significant defenses, so it's not surprising to me that the Colonials were unable to take it. The Colonials, while they were attacking us in Upper Barony Road here, this is where we were, a bunch of random Wardens, I'd say there were 3 of them, they ran down Barony Road, and for whatever reason, they decided to set up a small base here, complete with walls and an FOB, but there were only 3 of them, so they couldn't claim it. But they figured, hey, what the heck, we'll just put that there. And it was nice because it guaranteed our supply lines went unhindered, and our supply lines were pretty long, so it was nice that we didn't have to worry about landmines or attackers coming that way. Especially since with so many Colonials pouring out of Greenfield as well as coming up from Upper Barony, we needed the we needed those supplies basically constantly. But we did eventually lose Barony Road after about 2 hours of fighting. So I think it's worth mentioning that this is the first time PUG had been pushed back from one of the positions that they'd taken, at least one that we hadn't abandoned. We were on the defensive for those full 2 hours, and we learned a lot from that, which I'll get into later. But right now, but before we lost that position, because we saw it coming maybe 10 minutes in advance, we pulled everything out, and I mean everything. We pulled every drop of equipment and ran it back to Barony Field here to regroup. But that's neither here nor there. So once the Wardens had secured Loftmire here in the south, we started to see a lot of pings along this road, Providence Road. So there was definitely some fighting going on this way. I'm almost certain of that. The effect of which is hard to tell, but definitely the Wardens were on the offensive. With these randoms that had set up this base here, I actually went over and asked them specifically if we could use it, and they were happy to do it because happy to let us claim their FOB and use their little forward base, because the Colonials, once they were done with Barony Crossroad, they just kept going. And they encountered this little base and they just immediately started opening up on it. At that point, we took our equipment from Upper Barony here and we moved it into this random FOB with no salvage node and just started fortifying the hell out of it. And there was a pretty decent fight along this road, but the Colonials, I think, realized that it was a fairly useless base since it wasn't guarding anything except our road, and they gave it up in lieu of pushing south to fight the Wardens down, pushing out of Loftmire. So this is probably about 3 hours into the game now. The Wardens were definitely on the offensive. The Colonials were acting defense for most of this game, but at this point, notably, the Colonial supply line was completed. Like, it had a complete supply circuit going all the way around, and they could trade their equipment and make sure they had whatever they wanted. Like, the armories were reconnected, so they could produce basically an unlimited number of weapons, just like we could. And they could get them where they needed to be because Barony Road was there. But not 30 minutes after we'd lost that, the Wardens had managed to secure Providence Road. Again, we know that because we saw the pings and we saw all sorts of random stuff coming up from the coalitions that were working down there. And they were definitely getting hammered, just like we were up at Barony Road. The Colonials had resecured our position up here, but because they were losing their Providence Road and they didn't want another repeat of Barony Crossroad, they immediately went south, and they basically let us have our forward base here at Barony Road without much of a fight. But by this point in the game, we had artillery. I think the tech nodes, or the tech up for artillery, might need to be pushed a little bit longer because I felt like that was too soon for us to get it. But we made good use of it right away. We stockpiled a huge amount of material, or artillery shells and mortar shells in this FOB, and we continued our supply lines unhindered because we'd managed to evacuate so much out of the Barony Crossroad. We still had a ton of materials to use, so we built a bunch of artillery shells. We moved south into the wild here and set up a firing position right around there with the artillery. I think you can see what's going to be happening next. They didn't see us doing that. They just saw the immediate threat down here, and once it was uncovered, and we did get uncovered, we took immediate fire. So I think I have some footage of that. So yeah, you can see from our firing base here that we just sort of set up a couple of foxholes, nothing too serious. But we were waiting for morning to really get the attack going. But you can see we were discovered pretty early on. We hadn't quite started firing yet, and you can see there are quite a few of us. There's about 8 of us, but we're going to need 3 people manning that artillery piece, which is only going to leave a small number defending the front line. We found and we learned from the battle at Barony Road that special equipment was vital to holding or defending a position. So Lager there with the machine gun in the foxhole. We also had enough artillery or mortar shells to counter enemy infantry as they pushed up. So let's see if we can fast forward a little bit. Okay, so we managed to get the artillery piece firing, and you can see us moving up to cover Urgovtar, who's using the binoculars to sort of spy the, or to scout for the enemy, or sorry, scout for our artillery piece. But there's definitely a lot of fighting going on in Greslie's binoculars here. You can see their defenses are still intact. We didn't try to knock out the defenses. At this point, we were just shooting at their FOB, or shooting at their town hall and their barracks. But we had a lot of a lot of colonials bearing down on us. They were desperate to defend Lower Barony, and I think they knew what was coming with that artillery piece. Once the shells started falling, they knew that this was a priority, and so a lot of the colonials started rushing over west to attack us in the field. Okay, so anyway, going into this again, so once we managed to secure that position, we did destroy their FOB. Using the artillery, we knocked out the FOB and we knocked out all the barracks, which really demoralized them, I think, because up until this point the colonials had been had been on the offensive, and now it felt like they were losing that ground. All that work that they'd poured into retaking Barony Road, suddenly they'd lost twice as much. They'd resecured Barony Road, but they'd lost Providence Road, and now they'd also lost Barony Field, which is huge. It was probably, or we know it was very demoralizing for them, because at this point a huge number of colonials started dropping off. In that same day, because the colonials had been so devastated at Lower Barony, and because they'd lost all their spawns, the Wardens managed to push up from Providence Road and to secure Lower Barony, and PUG switched into retaking our position here at Barony Crossroad. Okay, so with PUG's position at Barony Crossroad regained, essentially this game was pretty much over. We had this conquered, the Wardens had a Lower Barony conquered. I think we can get rid of this icon now. Yeah, there you go. And the Wardens were holding a pretty solidified line down here in the south. Again, I don't know what clans were mounting these attacks, but they were fairly organized, and I didn't see any of them operating on the Discord channels, so it might be a Russian clan, it might be CML, because I know they use TeamSpeak, and I don't see TeamSpeak, so that might have been what was going on. Our supply line was still stretched, but because we'd managed to resecure Barony Crossroad, we now had a salvage node to use. So we refortified the hell out of this area. So yeah, once we'd retaken that position, I think it was pretty much, the writing was on the wall for the colonials. And I think it's cool to sort of bring up why that is, because a lot of people don't understand the strategic layer of this game necessarily. The reason why they'd had lost at this point was because without Lower Barony Field, they don't have a complete, they have a very vulnerable supply line. This is their only road connecting the two. And more importantly than that is the blemish becomes a major target. Because this doesn't have an armory in it. It doesn't have an armory in it, and the supply line for the Wardens to take it is not that long. Since we had Loftmeyer, this is not a huge supply line when you consider that their weapons have to come from here. So the colonials are basically fighting at even footing at the blemish. Like, this is not a good situation to be in when your factory is under attack and their supply line is short. So the Blemish was under some pretty significant fighting, and I think a lot of the colonials recognized that and started moving this way because, again, moving very quickly through this, PUG basically met no resistance. We knocked out Greenfield Orchard, took it no problem. PUG then later went back, went over to Oleander, took it no problem. And by this point, they'd realized what was going on, and there was only 20 some odd colonials left, and then all sides converged on Blemish and knocked it out for the end of the game. So that was the whole game. Okay, so I want to get into talking a bit more about what we learned from this, because there was a lot of stuff going on and a lot of interesting stuff that we got to experiment with. The first and foremost was here at Barony Road. So this battle took place. There was an unprecedented number of colonials attacking this. With our supply line through Barony Road being so long, it meant that we had a lot of PUG running logistics. We had 5 guys running logistics, which is easily twice the number what we normally have, which meant we only had about 8 guys for defending the line. So with only 8 guys defending the line against maybe 20 colonials, it was pretty tough to hold that. But I have some footage here from, again. So now that I've sort of gone over what the war, how the war looked, we'll go into more granular detail here. This is the battle at Barony Crossroad, our guys defending it. Again, this is Gresliebear shooting the footage. I was somewhere in the back doing logistics, so I haven't even seen this footage yet. We're just watching it now for the first time. But you can see there's a whole lot of dead bodies here. The fighting took place mostly going north-south along the road toward Lower Barony, which meant that a lot of their equipment was coming from Blemish, or must have been coming from Blemish. What we needed to do was bring more specialized equipment. What PUG is usually known for is working in tight units, and that usually gives us enough of a numerical advantage to just have a steamroll people. So when we move in a tight squad of, say, 10 people, or not even 10, let's say 5 people, we have enough concentrated fire to really end the game, or end the fight quickly. But since, in this case, they outnumbered us just by having a huge number of enemy, or having a huge number of people just coming at us from Greenfield and Lower Barony, we couldn't possibly get our maneuverability to work in our advantage. Never mind that because they had weapons coming from both Blemish and Greenfield, they had more equipment than we did. They had mortar shells here that they could afford to just waste trying to knock 1 or 2 guys off. And there was just no way we could hold the line. So at this point, the call went out to evacuate. So another thing I want to mention here is you notice this wall. With the FOB. It takes exactly 5 wall sections to completely enclose an FOB, and I think this is something that needs to be done on all FOBs, especially the forward ones, not to use concrete walls all the way around. They are tougher, yes, but with these doors, because there's 3 doors leading in, assuming they did retake this position or take this FOB out, they wouldn't simply be able to replace the door with one of their own and use the walls against us. Because there's 3 doors here, they're forced to clear all 3 and then build 3 walls to replace it. And only that way would they be able to use the concrete walls that we had used against them. And that's why we have more walls, or more doors than concrete when we're surrounding the FOB. So we've lost a lot of cohesion by this point, and it looks like I said, the call to evacuate is going out very soon here. But I think it was definitely the right call. You can see the mortar shells. They're within mortar shell of our FOB, mortar range of our FOB, so we had to take drastic measures. So what we learned from that, more than anything, was the need for specialized equipment. So when we realized that we were no longer the numerical, we no longer held the numerical advantage. So we needed to find a better way to counter large blocks of infantry. We have, like you can see in this image here, there's 6, 7 of us. That's quite a hell of a block, but when you're going up against 20, 7 of us isn't going to do us any good. So what we made sure to do this time around, we made sure to bring things like grenades, made sure to bring MGs. And I know it's probably like, oh, well, obviously you need to bring that stuff, but surprisingly, we haven't had to use that in the past because we found the maneuverability was far more valuable to us than the technical uses of machine guns and mortar. The reason why it's required, obviously, is because you need the machine guns to gain your fire supremacy. If you are outnumbered, you need to find a way to equalize that fire support, and the MG did a really good job of that. The mortar does a really good job of knocking out guys who stand still, like the guys who go prone, and that happens a lot. If you get into a firefight with the enemy, almost immediately everybody goes prone and nobody can hit anybody because they're shooting each other from a full screen away and nobody's getting any kills. At that point, it's a perfect opportunity for mortar to just get them dug or to dig them out. So from now on, that's definitely something PUG is going to be trying to exercise more usually, is to bring this specialized equipment and expect to be outnumbered. Because we have no problems clearing out small groups of 3 or 4. That's nothing. Clearing out squads of 20 is another story entirely. So like you can see here, we're just using grenades. We're using them to clear out not just foxholes, but clear out enemy infantry because we have equipment. We evacuated Lower Barony Field, so we have tons. This is the base I was telling you about with the 3 guys who'd set up a small fortification on the road, on Barony Road. The Colonials had pushed right up to the front of it, and this is us trying to repel them. So we also, and that it's probably worth noting again, the SMGs might be a little bit overpowered now. Rifles were the weapon of choice before, but we found lately that the SMGs are almost more accurate at long range. It's because their volume of fire is so high and their damage is so good that just spraying wildly at long range will land you more kills and more damage than a rifle will. So you'll notice all of us are running SMGs. Also, we had problems with people just running up and fisting us, and SMGs definitely help with that. So you'll notice a strong cohesion here. This is more a note for other clans and other groups. If you haven't seen the video we did with the squad formations, this is a really good opportunity to see it. Right now, KrazyFlyinChicken is in command. You can see me prone there. Notice how everyone is behind me. Like, that's what the formation should look like. The squad leader is the one in the front. The squad leader is the one who decides the range at which we're going to fight. And if the squad leader is not well versed in the game or not is still fairly new, then that squad leader is going to die first every time. That's what I say to people to get them to follow me, essentially. I tell them, follow me. I should always be the first to die, and that gets some of the randoms more inclined to just follow me around, because then they can guarantee that they won't be killed, because it'll be me dying first. So yeah, that's the retaking of the position. Again, I'm going to go fast forward to the. All right, so I showed you this footage already, but I wanted to come back to it to reiterate on that point about the machine guns and mortars. Machine guns are really good for machine guns and mortars are really good in conjunction because it gives you that fire supremacy. It didn't matter how many people they sent at this position. This position was not going to fall because every time they stopped to start unloading on us, we would shell them with a mortar tube. And every time they pushed us to get at our mortar tube, we'd have a machine gun. Um, our position here was impregnable from the flank because we had foxholes surrounding us, and direct attack from the front was not going to be successful. So the only thing they could have done was to throw bodies at us until we ran out of ammo, which is exactly the kind of situation you want to set up for your team. And exactly the kind of situation we wanted when we brought mortar into the team. Or mortar in. Sorry, not mortar. When we brought artillery in. So I'm waiting for this, just the fighting to actually start here, because I think this is, I showed you this already, but I want to show it to you again. Because Gresley here is the mortar man. This is what I was talking about. You need to have these support units there to sort of prevent you, or prevent the enemy from holding any kind of a line against you. Like, see, we're out in the open now. We'd have no foxholes around us, but they're not coming close because you can see all their bodies they'd tried. Like, every time they get close, they get hit. And that's the kind of mentality you want to give your opponent, is to just back off. And there's only there's only 5 of us out front here, because there's 3 of us on the mortar, or on the artillery piece. So this is an effective combat line right here, what you're looking at. You've got a mortar man in the back, an MG in the front, and everyone else with rifles just holding a line. And this time when we move up, they decide to go prone, you just hit them with a mortar shell and they're stuck again. And you can move up again. So you're watching right now, you're watching 4 guys moving up on a squad of probably 10 guys, and they're afraid of us and I think that's, again, that's the exactly kind of situation you want to set up for your team. The artillery's not shelling the foxholes because we feel it's a waste. It takes 2 shells to kill a foxhole, and those are 20 mats a shell. So it's not a good trade-off when the mortar shells can clear them just as quickly. Okay, so that's pretty much all the footage I want to show you of the game itself. There was a lot of really cool stuff we were doing. Like, we were driving around in these half tracks for a while with a truck full of build mats so we could win the game, but it was largely not useful, or nothing interesting. So yeah, so that was what you were just watching, was this firebase here. That was when the colonials had found our firebase and decided they wanted to attack us. Okay, so I think that's all I really wanted to talk about with respect to the weekly war number 19. But thanks for watching.